Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Entrepreneurs Lunch and Learns, and today is going to be a very special episode with Mr. Charles Fisher, who has an interesting background in the franchise world and the military world, and how he's moved to Puerto Rico with his family office and is expanding through mergers and acquisitions, which we'll get into all these kind of finer details throughout the process. But first of all, welcome, and I appreciate you joining.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. And thank you for the audience for tuning in.
Yeah. We've been getting to know each other, for the last little under a year now, and I've definitely gained a lot of respect through all the conversations and the advice that you've been providing, and I think you're definitely well tuned for this. So just to kind of set the context for this video and what we're going to lead into, this is going to be a video more focused on Charles and who he is and his background, and we're going to have a series that comes following this in other videos where we're talking more specifics on the theme of mergers and acquisitions, and the whole context behind it is on how you as an entrepreneur could grow and expand and create scaling solutions and efficiencies and operations and so forth that could allow you to have some unique ways of growing your company or setting it up to be acquired at a higher multiple. So all things we'll get into in more context. But so we're just getting into it. We're figuring out what we have with this, but I think this is a powerful message, and we'd love your comments and your likes and just direction as we move forward with this series if you have themes that you want us to talk on. But with all that kind of context in mind, let's start with who you are, Charles, and just to give kind of the audience some perspective on where you're coming from, and so we can kind of build up and give context to the credibility you have. And so maybe starting with your military journey, just how you got into business, and we can go from there.
Yeah, no worries. And so this is when I'm supposed to share that personal story, eh?
Sure.
Okay. For the audience, if you haven't met me again, my name is Charles Fisher. And we moved to Puerto Rico maybe about 5.5 years ago, and have loved the journey here. And so for anyone who's considering Puerto Rico, highly encourage it. At least give it a look. How's that? Give it a fair shake. It's been a real blessing on us and our family. And I'd say my story starts maybe before the military, right? And so believe it or not, I once upon a time I lived in Washington, D.C. area. Okay. My wife and I, she was born in Panama, myself in Washington, D.C., so we're not necessarily what I consider a normal couple by any stretch of the imagination. Sure. And for myself, in the D.C. area, it was back in a time before D.C. became what we know it today, right? Maybe it had a lot more trouble back in my day. We had crime and other challenges. And as we moved through that journey, I had a very narrow perspective of what life could be, of what I would be in the future, right? And so that's important, because for me, this narrow perspective was just what the inner city of Washington, D.C. was. That's all I knew. I knew the crime, I knew how to dodge the crime, I knew how to stay out of trouble, and I knew the limited amount of education I had at that point. And my mother, in this case, took a very daring move, and she sent me to a boarding school, which there's a lot of stigma with boarding schools. Why would you go and send your son away to a boarding school? Well, in this case, she did it for a number of reasons. And one, it's a fantastic opportunity. I went to the Hill School, which is one of the top boarding schools in the nation, at least at that time. And it was a change of perspective, right? And so this idea of the Hill School, the perspective being one of the top of the nation, high affluent people all over the world were coming to the school. That perspective is way different than the very narrow Washington, D.C., born and bred, inner city child, who was dodging crime, right? Instead, now it's about opportunity and what do you want to do in life, and how do you add value to the world, and how do you go out and serve, and what are the ways to create the next new thing? We've got Heinz Ketchup and Trump and all these other folks are going to this type of educational platform, and I'm in the mix. And so my perspective has just shifted. And then this became this idea of the dynamic between my old perspective and the new perspective. What is this? Who wins? And then how do you tie them together, right? All right, so that's that kind of the beginning story.
That's good.
And then from there, for me, the next step was to go to the Naval Academy, right? And so I went to the military. That was the right step for me. And I really enjoyed my military service. I served for about 14 years, was a ship driver, surface warfare officer for a period of time, and then I became an IP or informational professional, which is kind of the IT version for the military. I don't know why it has a different name, but kind of IT. And then I ran a special project out of Iraq for a period of time, right? And again, perspective. So when you're in the military and you're serving on a ship and you're doing the things you do, you have this perspective. And then I have the perspective from the inner city, and then I have the perspective from the Hill School, right? All these different perspectives. And then you go to a war zone. Man, I tell you, perspective changes again, right? And so leading that special project out of Iraq was very interesting, right? As you look at the conflict and the leadership, and then obviously running a special program. This case it was a rapid development program where we were trying to do some counter IED stuff. That perspective was different again, right? And so as I looked at that and realized to myself, and I put all these things together as I'm traveling back and forth from Iraq, I realized maybe there's a different way to lead life, right? Maybe there's a different way to do the things you want to do in life and accomplish. And so at that time, I had already met my wife. We actually met in the military on an aircraft carrier, believe it or not. And we were married, I had kids, and my initial vision was, how do I provide for the family, right? How do I do this? And the military seemed to be a good fit. And when you're in Iraq, you're realizing, well, you know what? You could provide for your family, but maybe you can do it differently. I mean, maybe you could do it in a more abundant fashion. And so that led me to becoming an entrepreneur, right? And so all these perspectives combined, I don't know how, came to the equation of let's serve through entrepreneurism. Like, let's get out into the world and add value to the world through your business efforts. And that's how I make my impact, right? And so that's kind of a summary of the beginning phase of my journey, right? This idea of how perspective really matters. Like, so now when I have conversations with people, it helps me always to remember, like, Drew's perspective may be different from mine. And I should appreciate his perspective, right? Because whatever you see is what you see, and you and I can share knowledge and impact and serve each other based on that perspective, right? And then, oh my goodness, if Drew has a new perspective, again, we're going to have new sharing, a new journey that we can take together, because you can share that perspective with me, and I can really take a lot of insight. And so this idea of perspective is important to me, and I appreciate you giving us time to even just share my story. All right, so continue on.
Yeah, so I think that's good. I mean, so you obviously were impacted from multiple different areas of your life through, obviously growing up in kind of a diverse setting in DC, which led to the boarding school, which probably had a lot of discipline and training and kind of giving you that type of structure, which led to you joining the Navy and going into a war zone and getting married, and just a lot of different things kind of leading up to it, which were kind of mindset perspectives. And I'm hearing you say you're approaching life with this open mind that everybody's coming from different experiences and they're doing the best they can with the information that they've had up until this point, and you really can gain a lot of benefit by sitting back and listening to their perspective instead of like leading with a judgment, because that might close your ears to information that could give you a perspective and direction. Is that fair recap?
That's fair recap. I want to be clear. He just did in 30 seconds what took me 10 minutes to share with you. So great job, Drew. I really appreciate that.
So kind of leading into it. So we get the context with how you were in the military perspective. How did that lead into business, and how did we get to this point?
Yeah, and so this idea of perspective again, right? So one, I'm thankful we're doing this time together, because my hope and desire for us is, let's share some perspective from this window of M&A, right? And now let's talk the entrepreneur journey post-military, right? And so you heard me say earlier, like, how do I provide for my family in a more abundant fashion, right? And the military is fantastic. I want to be clear, fantastic career. I encourage it for everyone who has that heart. However, the idea is that the thresholds are different on the entrepreneurial side than on the military side. It is what it is. There's just certain, intrinsic things that are part of the system, right? And so for us, believe it or not, while we were in the military, we and I say we, my wife and I, we acquired our very first franchise. And so while I was serving in Iraq, we have the blessings of acquiring a massage rooming franchise.
Nice. Way
back in the day, the very beginning of the brand. And I'd love to tell you it was very strategic, it was very deliberate. It wasn't. It was very much God's blessings, happenstance, and the things just aligned in order for that to happen, right? However, the nice thing about it was that started our entrepreneurial journey, right? We may have thought Dunkin' Donuts was going to be our start. Instead, it became Massage Jimmy.
Yeah.
And from that first location, we grew. We found that a lot of the things that we did well in the military really apply to the civilian sector, right? Leadership of people, managing of people,
Yeah.
holding people accountable, like all those things, ability to adhere to a system,
Yeah.
ability to fine tune and really drive a system, right? All of those things apply so well. And so we took a lot of those skill sets and really helped drive the business. And then we opened up our second one from scratch. We did that well. Then we went out and we did our third. And at a certain point, when we got to number 3, it was like, we're making a lot more money on the entrepreneur side, on the business side,
Yeah.
than we are ever going to see on the military side. And so at that point, it was time to make a choice. And I decided to separate. My wife retired after 23 years of service for herself.
Wow.
And really started to take the business to scale, right? And so for scale for us was a combination of acquisitions and organic growth, right? So we would open up a new location or we would buy a new location. And during that journey, a couple nuggets, right? During that journey of scaling the business, in reflection, you get some understanding, right? And so one of the understandings is, and for those of you who are in the military, I want to share this, you can't save everyone, right? And so in the military, the dynamic is very interesting, right? The perspective is very interesting. We get the people we get, and we use those people to the best of our abilities. And what I mean by use, not to be, to look at them as inorganic objects, but this idea that the person you have is the person you lead and the person you serve and the person you work with, and you just try to do everything you can to make that machine work,
Yes.
right? In the business sector, not the same, right? In the business sector, very much that attitude is noble, however, is a bit of a detriment to a business, right? You could hold on too long for a person. So my nugget to just share from that transition from military to business owner is that if you have that life story, don't hold on too long, right? There is this inclination as a leader to really want to work with them and save and do everything you can. You can't save everyone, basically. You really have to make a choice, a very deliberate and intentional choice to put the business first and then make decisions that are going to be beneficial for the business first and then work for the people that you can work to help save, right? All right, so that's a nugget. And then the other nugget in this franchise journey, we ended up growing to about 25 or so franchise locations across 5 or 6 different states. Across 6 different brands. We were in and out of some brands. We were able to get in and out pretty well. Another nugget I would share is this growth by acquisition is a hell of a lot more profitable than growth by startup, right? And so what do I mean by that? And so in this case, in the franchise world, when you're growing, you organically grow the business itself, right? The single location, you maximize efficiency, personnel, output, customer growth, you name it. You do all those things. Maybe you add a new product cycle, whatever that is. And then once you kind of hit a threshold or you really got your stride going in that location, it's time to open up number 2. That's kind of how this works. You go open up another one. And so that growth is fantastic. However, you take a lot of risk, right? The idea is even though you know the business really well, it's a new lease potentially, or it's a new set of employees potentially, or it's a new set of liability, whatever that looks like. Every time you open up another location, you're taking all that on, and you're taking it on from scratch, like no revenue. So this is a negative cash flow period for you every time you open up a new location, by and large. However, if you go and you buy your next franchise that's already operating, that already has cash flows, right? You still kind of have a lot of those same risks, but now you're handling those risks with cash flow, maybe with intrinsic business systems that have been there for a while, maybe with a customer base that's been coming to that location for a long time, understand you. There may be some other problems, but when you weigh those two things, in my personal opinion, growing through acquisition, a hell of a lot better equation than growing by a fresh start. All right, and you're going to hear that theme come up again, I think, when you my bias in that, you'll hear that theme come up again over time as we talk. And so all that to say this, we really did do well, and we grew that. We had a lot of things that went well in that, and we were able to take exits. Once we were taking those exits, it became time to figure out how we're going to do some tax treatment on some of this stuff. And so Puerto Rico became an option for us. And so we moved down to Puerto Rico. And from here, we've been running a family office. We do a lot of investments in tech. That's my favorite, artificial intelligence. We did a startup ourselves, an insurtech startup in artificial intelligence that We built a AI that can monitor for sexual assault and sexual harassment in the workplace. And then from there, we now place investments. We're actually doing a roll-up right now on the online education with the repositioning to fintech, because we have a couple of fintech businesses that we also bought in that. And then that's given us a very nice multiple arbitrage, right? And so the idea here for us, ideally, God willing, we'll take that business, continue to scale that along with other acquisitions to bolt underneath of it, and we'll take that to a nice little exit here down the road. So God willing, we'll see how that works. And so that's kind of the story. And hopefully there were some nuggets there to share. So to recap the nuggets, in theory, so one, perspective. Perspective is valuable, and that's why I like this podcast for us. So we share people an M&A perspective, so they can see some of the same problems through an M&A lens and say, oh man, that's another tool I can put in our toolbox.
Yes.
And then I would say the other one is that, look, can't save everyone. We want to, and this is my perspective, by the way. We want to save everyone potentially, but really you have to put the needs of the business first. The business has to eat first. Those things have to grow. And then if you're able to work and save and help and serve, great, as long as you've kind of taken care of the animal that's going to help provide for those people. And then I think number three, the last nugget there, is this idea of that growing through acquisition should really be in everyone's toolbox. Like if that's not in your toolbox, if you're not really thinking about that, and I don't care what type of business you have, then hopefully we provide that perspective, and that could really help you and help folks just have an awareness at least, so they can see that when it's appropriate to use that tool. So those are kind of, that's my share.
Yeah, that's good. I think there were many nuggets to be had, and we're setting the stage for future videos that will kind of go more in depth on some of the strategy and thought process side of the equation. And again, like comment and like and put different questions that you have and themes that we can hit on. But I'm hearing how you started with one franchise, scaled it to 25. And since then have had some exits and came down to Puerto Rico because of the unique tax incentives as well as other lifestyle benefits, and now you're more in the active investing side, and you have this roll up in the fintech world, and it's exciting. You're right. It's just opens a lot of doors when you walk through this kind of like M&A space. So that's great. So let's maybe pivot. So you did this journey with your wife. So how was that process? Were you guys working actively together? Were there challenges along the way? Maybe those that are listening, are also married or just have questions around that theme. So if you want to hit on that.
Sure. No, I would love to. And so very challenging question. I'm sure my wife is either watching or listening to this, so I have to be very political with my answers. So now I will say that it is both the most wonderful gift that I've ever had and the most challenging time that we've ever had, right? And so let me speak to the gift, right? And so the gift in that is that my wife and I love her dearly. She's been my wife of 20-ish years now.
Wow.
We've got 4 kids together.
Impressive.
Yeah,
in
thank
today's
you.
society, dedication.
Sure.
That's what I'm hearing as a consistent theme in your story. You've just been very dedicated in military, business, and that, and I know spirituality, which we'll get into, but
Sure.
On your wife, yeah.
Okay. And so again, love her to death. And the time in business was the pressure cooker, right? The pressure cooker. And so I highly encourage, like if you have a husband and wife duo or you're thinking about it, I highly encourage everyone to do it as long as you have eyes wide open. All right. So let me explain that. Right. And so the idea here, my wife she's got a different personality from myself, what attracted me to her, right? She's got this great operational, she's very driven, she's great with people, she does a lot of things differently than I do. And when you put us in an environment like a business, right, obviously we have to work together, we both own, it's not as if I can override her at any given time, we have to work through challenges, that type of stuff. The idea here is it really forces you to work on things like communication, right? It really forces you to start thinking like, okay, how could I look at this differently, right? Perspective again, right? So my wife has clearly a different perspective on everything than I do. Yeah. Like she's born and raised from Panama. Like just that beginning is much different than mine, right? And so the idea here is for us, an appreciation of those perspectives was kind of the first lesson that I had to overcome and learn working with my wife. Like, well, her perspective is very valid, as valid as mine. And I need to appreciate it, and I need to consider it, right? And so those three things are much harder than you think. Like, so one, listening to that perspective, and then appreciating that perspective, and then actually actively considering and acting on that perspective is those are hard. You believe it or not, those are very hard for a married couple to do, right? And then, oh, by the way, I'm not sure how your spouse acts, but my particular spouse, work wouldn't stop when you get home, right? And so there's not the work-life balance piece that you might appreciate sometimes, like being able to come home and disconnect. It kind of changes when you both work in the business together, right? And when you're both growing and scaling business together. Those problems don't necessarily disappear. I would encourage you to maybe put some boundaries. So that's a good lesson that my wife and I both learned, is boundaries do matter. Applying those boundaries and having them kind of set as part of your routine is important. And but note that that's a very challenging aspect of, again, working together with your spouse and being in a relationship with them. Sure. You know, it doesn't necessarily turn off. And I'd say number three, you know, it's kind of the blessing in this, right? You heard me say again, work-life balance. This idea that work and life become one. Like, you really should kind of just throw away the idea of work-life. Instead, it needs to become bring the kids to work and everyone be a part of it. And I think that makes it a lot more manageable when you just accept the fact that there is no work-life balance. Instead, it's more of a life, and you'll just have to do it.
Yep.
And that becomes, I think, its own gift, right? Because now your kids are part of it, your team, your employees, and everyone else are part of it. They all see it. They become more like a work family as opposed to a separation, like a departure. Now, this won't work for all businesses, right? Clearly, some businesses are so large that the scale of the business itself doesn't lend itself well to that, and that's okay. However, for most small businesses, I think that's a real option to really consider, you know, kind of getting rid of this playbook of separating work and life and then just mix them, bring the kids as part of it, and then I believe it or not, your customers will be a lot more appreciative than you may think of that type of behavior, and really try to, you know, make it all work together as opposed to trying to make it balanced, because it's never going to balance. Like, everyone's going to want to eat at some point. They're all going to need your attention at some point. So balance won't ever work. So don't try. Intermingle, right? So those would be kind of my nuggets there. But again, it was a huge gift. Like, and so the outcome. So if you can work out all those things and make that work, what is the outcome? Why do it? So the outcome in this is that my relationship with my wife grew immensely. Like, and we really did this at the kind of the beginning journey of our marriage. Oh my goodness, like, there's no better, like, I heard me use the analogy of pressure cooker. There's no better pressure cooker to really cook your marriage and really bake it out so that by the end of this thing, like, when you come out and exit, my wife no longer really actively participates. She's more of a board member. She sits on the boards for most things that we do. However, you know, that trust that you build, the respect for the other person, you know, just an appreciation of who they are, both in a professional sense, personal sense, even a spiritual sense, you really can't get a better environment to do that. So those are, you know, that's kind of my takeaway from that. So I highly encourage anyone, if you're ever thinking about it, please give it a consideration. If you want some advice, please reach out to myself and Drew, whoever, and I'll be happy to either give you advice or link you up to some resources that we use to help us manage the time. But it was a worthwhile experience. Yeah, maybe that should be another episode. Feel inspired. There's a lot of context you could probably continue to go down, but I think you've set the table, and we smell the aroma of wanting to learn more from it. So that's good. So kind of wrapping up, maybe a couple other themes. Spirituality, I think that's a big part of my life. It's a big part of your life, and I'm curious how you've kind of integrated that throughout your process, and if you want to kind of hit on, you know, how God's impacted your journey and so forth. Yeah, sure. And so once upon a time, as a young child, I prayed to God. I said, God, you know what? I believe you're real. Yeah. But why do I need this Jesus guy? Like, what's the point? Like, what does Jesus need to do, be a part of this picture? You're there, I'm here, let's work this thing together. Yeah. It's like, if you need me to understand and want Jesus in my life, you're going to have to show me. And so my life has been a journey of God hitting me over the head, explaining to me why I need Jesus in my life. Sure. And so the context there, guys, if you don't understand that, is that you know, we have challenges that we overcome, and then we need kind of God's grace and mercy to overcome all those challenges, right? And so for me, and for others, my challenges have been across the board, like you name it. I've had all kinds of challenges, and I've needed a lot of grace, a lot of forgiveness to make it through. And so look, even just at the start of our business, a lot of grace, right? And so we went, I mentioned at the beginning of it, I said, hey, look, we were in the military. I was in Iraq, still serving back and forth, and we bought our first business. No one wrote in the playbook of buying a business that it's a bad idea to buy a business while you're in the military and serving in a war zone. I don't know, emails may not work well, communication's not there. You know, your wife might get a little stressed that you just bought a business and, oh, by the way, you're not here. Like those type of graces. And, oh, by the way, just even trying to purchase the business, the grace itself, because the idea is that the financing literally fell through 24 hours to closing. So we were literally had SBA loan ready to go, ready to close, and then 24 hours to close. Our bank calls us and says, you know, we've had some changing to our lending standards and blah, 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 and something that you guys can no longer be applied. And I was like, well, what happened? We got all this documentation. It's like, yeah, I'm sorry, we're going to withdraw the loan. 24 hours to closing of the business that we're supposed to be buying. And so, you know, me personally, I was like, you know what, let's get on our knees, let's pray. And that's what we did. We got on our knees, we prayed. And then we had a call with the owner of the business. And he said, you know what, don't worry about it. I'll finance the whole thing. Why don't you buy the business, right? And he financed the entire purchase of the business itself, the debt. He financed it all himself. He had some credit cards. He said, you know what, as long as you pay those credit cards, you know, and give me some money over time, I'll do a structured note for the difference. And that's what we did. And so, oh my goodness, that was never on the table. Like it was never even once a conversation. So that's just a measure of grace in our life where, you know, God has opened a door for us where there was clearly going to be a closed door. And then I could point to so many different aspects of my life where God has hit me over the head and say, look, I'm here, I'm present, I have authority in your life, I'm leading you, and here you go, right? And here's why you need Jesus, boom. And so for me, you know, it's just been a life of blessings, like from day one to day close. Like you heard me say, I changed your perspective. There was no way for me to get a change of perspective unless somewhere in my mother's mind, she made a decision to change my whole world and send me to a boarding school. That's not a normal decision people make. Like that's not a normal consideration they take. You know, my mother being, you know, the blessed woman that she is, God hooked her up somehow or another with some sort of communication that says, why don't you apply to this school, which you cannot afford? Like you've got no money to pay for one of the top schools in the nation. You can't afford it. Apply anyway. You know what, it'll be fine. Like who does that, right? Like where does that even come from? And then to be able to go through that and then for some odd reason, you know, they find financial aid to help offset it. Like we couldn't offset the whole thing, but offset some of it. And then we having to figure out how to come up with the other. And then my mother being able to overcome other obstacles financially and figure it out. That's all grace, right? And so for me personally, I can't see any aspect of my life that has been touched by God's favor or blessing at some point. So that's for me, that's where spirituality comes in. It's, again, living the story of here's why you need Jesus. Here's why you need Jesus, being beating over the top of my head, thank God, because I need that. And then been very blessed, so hardcore. And my wife is another measure of favor in my life. Like I could never even imagined meeting a woman as amazing as my wife. Like seriously, she meets no profile that I ever would have picked for myself, right? But the prayer was, like to God, it's like, hey, after I broke up with another girlfriend, the prayer was, hey, Lord, look, I'm screwing this up. I'm never going to get this right. Yeah, you're going to have to send somebody to me if you want this to be done. Right? Otherwise, I'm going to go do something stupid and go mess around over here, right? And so that's exactly what happened. And so, all that to say this, it's very, very much God working out in my life, kind of His power and authority. So, all right.
Amen.
Amen.
So that's powerful, and I appreciate your vulnerability. I know this is uncommon type of conversations to be having in A, talking about the marriage relationship, B, talking about spirituality, but, you know, it really hits back on the theme that you hit earlier, which I am in agreement with, that you want to have everything kind of, you know, integrate in your life, like you said, with business, family, and spiritual. Like the whole thing is just together, and you're learning how to just lead with that. If I'm understanding, you know, your success story, and what I'm also hearing you say without saying it is your gratitude, and you know, you're just, you know, you're keeping that perspective and giving the honor to God, and so that's, you know, I get it, and that's really cool to hear. That perspective, and you've just walked through the doors that have been presented, and you know, on faith, you know, still moved ahead and led to the SBA and other, I'm sure, analogies and stories we'll be able to get into in other episodes, but powerful. And I also want to say thank you for serving our nation from a military perspective. I don't think enough honor is given to those that make a sacrifice for the freedom that we have. And it's definitely in today's world, it's something to be honored. So cool. I think maybe just kind of like wrapping it up, just to kind of put a bow on like the direction of where we're going with future episodes in the M&A, mergers and acquisition space and everything like that. We're going to hit on the themes of how to scale, how to grow, and how to increase efficiency in operations, and kind of a mindset that, goes behind that. So maybe just to kind of like set the table for future, in the last, couple minutes, how would you, maybe give some perspective on, some of that we'll be delivering?
Sure. And so, again, I think it ties to this idea of the overarching outcome for our watchers or our listeners in this perspective. I want to give them a new perspective on some of the problems they may be wrestling with. Like all entrepreneurs, we all kind of wrestle with the same bucket of problems. And so the thought here is, let's apply another set of tools that you may not be aware of, this perspective that you may not be appreciating to tackle those problems through this lens of M&A, right? Now, look, I to give you context, the biggest businesses in the world, that's just how they've done it. And so we're not giving you like new smoke and mirrors. Like we're giving you some tried and true classics that really you may not have considered because maybe you think you're too small, or maybe you're like, oh, I'm a middle market business and I just don't have the resources to get that done. Okay, great. Those are all excuses. Those are obstacles. Don't worry about that. We'll overcome those. And the idea here is that we're going to help them have, or help our listeners hopefully have a perspective here that they can apply certain tools to certain problems that they may not have considered before. So this idea of perspective. And then the idea too is like hopefully we'll share some nuggets, some gems, right, in our time together. I find that in my conversations with so many people, they got these great gems. Like, oh man, you should publish a book on that, right? And maybe we'll be able to share and pull some of those things out, because I think our intent is to bring some smart people on and really talk about their stories.
Yes.
And then help share kind of their M&A journey and how that's done. And I think the third outcome I'd like to have for us, if we can all agree on it, I want to see them become successful, right? I want to see us all be successful. And I think people don't appreciate what success can look like and how much easier success could be if you apply certain tools to the game, right? And so hopefully we'll pull out some of those tools. Clearly I've got an M&A lens, and this is kind of what we're supposed to be talking about. So I'll be sharing a lot more of those tools. However, I think the thought here is when you're looking at your startup, right, and maybe thinking, oh, I have to go do a VC raise, or oh, I have to go do this, or I have to go do that. Maybe we can be like, oh, maybe you don't have to do that. Have you considered just going and buying your audience? And if you're thinking, what do you mean by buying your audience? Well, then you need to tune in, because I'm going to explain what that means, right? Or the thought here is, if you've got an existing business, but the problem that you've been wrestling with is your business is in decline, right? Whatever happened, your market is dying, you just don't see an end, really you don't know a way out. And it's like, oh, what am I going to do? Am I going to close this thing? Like, what's going to happen? Like, you're wrestling with that stress, right? Well, allow me to apply an M&A lens to that for you, and I'll show you what you can do, and we can really talk through that. Because again, these are areas that entrepreneurs wrestle with, and we're going to see you become successful. And so hopefully we'll apply some tools, give you some scenarios, help you see yourself in some other businesses that we talk to or work with, and that'll provide value.
Yep, well said. And yeah, we'll be hitting on those themes throughout the process. So definitely want to tune in for future episodes. And so again, thank you for coming on and instilling your wisdom and experience. And I think those that continue on this journey are going to find one of profitability and peace of mind that comes through these types of structures. So excited to go on this journey with you. Appreciate it, Charles.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Tune in soon.
Bye,
Episode
guys.
coming soon.